Yo, what's happening, Ma?
Hey, son, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. How about you?
Yeah, I'm interested in doing this, the alphabet bomber.
You know, as I was thinking about what we would talk about in this conversation, it really struck me that the times that this story was happening in are very similar, actually, in a lot of ways to the times that we find ourselves in right now. The social unrest, the racial unrest regarding the police, anti-war protests. Did that occur to you at all? And do you see parallels?
I agree with you. There were things happening nationally that had people questioning government, which is happening right now and happened in the last administration. Let's not be unfair. But like Nixon was just about to resign, I think a week after the initial bombing, the bombing of LAX. When I did the research and I was looking for information about the bombing, it was not prominent on the pages of even the LA papers. It was inside. And that's because Nixon and Watergate, which of course was, a cover up, that dominated. So it wasn't even as important then, as you might have expected it to be.
Other things I found surprisingly relevant as well. There was this aerospace revolution that was happening in Southern California at the time, which is so strange because a similar thing is happening right now as well. In addition to the fact that, I think there are a lot of disaffected youth and young men right now who are also perpetrating similar crimes, also utilizing the technology of today, just like he did.
How fascinating that he manipulated the news media and general public as well with tapes. Like now we've got Twitter and Facebook and all these things. And he's doing it with a cassette tape wrapped in a green paper, stuffed in a planter, which honestly is a little bit, wacky, brilliant, right? It's all quirky. The red wig is quirky, all these things. It draws news media attention.
It's the precursor to what we're seeing now. Now people are live streaming these horrific mass shootings via Facebook video, and people are sharing the links on 4chan, and people are live streaming things on Twitch. It's really horrifying. You can see where this is really very much the precursor to that. In an age before you could live stream content, how are you as a mentally unwell person going to control the narrative and the story that you want to put out there without a reporter interjecting, live on air if you're calling a radio station or something like that? This is the way that you would do that.
It's funny that you would say that because I think there's really a strong component in him feeling alienated and trying to take control back. He could not get his taxi dance hall permit. He could not get a job for a time period. Kurbegovic lays that at the feet of being from another country, being an immigrant. Now, I'm not sure that's true or not, because I feel like that could have happened to you or me too, right?
Speak for yourself. I don't do that in taxi dance halls, but yes.
Whether you think he was actually doing something lewd in a public restroom or not is kind of irrelevant because he was found innocent of the charge. That should have been the thing that stuck with him, but it didn't. What stuck with him was the charge, and that's so not American. Things that are happening now, you could see a parallel to that too.
I think the instinct, and it's the correct instinct, I think, initially when one of these crimes breaks in the news today, is to immediately dogpile on the person, say they're a garbage human being, and to have no empathy to their plight at all. And when there are people who have been killed, whose lives have been cut short, it's really difficult to think about it from another point of view. But, there are times in this narrative where I do find myself, maybe because of the way, that you dug into the character and constructed the story, where I do actually find myself empathizing with this guy's plight, where he seems to be doing everything right, where he seems to be a smart guy who's putting himself in a position to succeed. And, he's even going out there and representing himself in court in a very effective way. And he is continuously, seemingly slapped down by the powers that be.
And you said seemingly in an effective way in the courtroom. And that was acknowledged by the prosecutors. That's not like his own people are saying that. The prosecutor said he did a good job in the courtroom. We all endure like bureaucratic snafus that kind of, mess with us, right? Like it might be with the phone company or your cable company or the government or something where they get it wrong. I get that frustration of being the little guy and having something, that you can't conquer.
I think the point at which that gets complicated is when you do have somebody with serious mental illness who can't distinguish between what is a righteous beef and what is not, and how far to take that response. And that's, of course, where you get these horrific events.
He was ultimately found schizophrenic. So he had a warped perception of the world. And he was playful. Like he obviously had a little bit of sociopathy, right? Because you can't kill someone and then be cracking jokes and being clever afterward, unless you have that.
I became aware of this story probably 5-6 years ago, and it was just so shocking to me that it had never been exposed. When it was an attack that occurred in one of the biggest airports in the world, and an airport that I was constantly going in and out of for work.
And to find out that the perpetrator was still alive. I mean, at least as we're recording this. So, but you should be sure and tell everybody about contacting him, because that's fascinating as well.
Yeah. So when I first found out about this particular story, I was constantly looking for interesting stories to potentially serve as the inspiration for documentaries and documentary miniseries and things like that. And when I came across this one, and specifically the tapes, I thought there would be a ton of potential if I could dig up the original tapes. Now, unfortunately, the recordings that you hear in our episode here had to be recreations that were based on court transcriptions, because I couldn't get a hold of the original tapes. I actually did reach out to law enforcement. I did reach out to the FBI. I submitted FOIA requests, and I got denied. I think maybe it's an issue of law enforcement being concerned that they don't want to turn these kinds of people into martyrs for the next generation of mentally unwell people who are looking for inspiration for their attacks. But, at the same time, I do think it's really important to know about the past so that we don't repeat it, and to share some of these cautionary tales as well. But so after I got interested in the story, I started doing outreach for the tapes. I realized that the guy was still alive and in prison, and I decided to try to reach out to him. I think I had to send a letter, and then I had to request, that I be allowed to start making communications with the guy. And the first thing that this weirdo did, that Kerbegovic did, was he first had other prisoners that he was living with in jail vet me. So the first thing that happened was I started getting letters from other prisoners in his orbit that were asking me questions about what my intentions were and things like that. And by the way, he's in like a maximum security facility. He's a serious guy doing hard time. So the people that were reaching out to me were also of that ilk. After a while, I think they decided that I seemed okay. I didn't want him to have my actual phone number. So what I did was I created a burner account, and I ended up sending that phone number. There were also then pre-calls from his prisoner buddies to vet me via phone. And eventually he would call me when he had access to the phone. It would happen at very random times. He's not a guy who apparently has access to the internet or to the phone whenever he wants to use it. So it wasn't like you could set up times with this guy. Not to mention the fact that he, I don't think, is of a mental wellness to be able to handle logistical things.
And what was he like?
I talked to him probably 2 or 3 times over the course of a month or something like that. And the thing was, he was not a very coherent thinker and was not particularly forthcoming. And he was very skeptical that I may have been an agent of the state. And so I think a lot of our phone calls were me explaining my intentions and what I hope to get out of a potential interview. And so the calls were a lot of me talking, but at the same time, he was a rambling guy who didn't have a lot of very clear or specific thoughts. And the way that the whole thing ended was he ended up sending me another letter, and it was a packet that included a list of basically demands. In order for me to talk to him more, he expected to get all of these different items from his list. There were a number of different itemized objects from his prison store that were things that he wanted. They were things like a thermal shirt, an electric beard trimmer, and he was basically demanding that I buy him all these things from this list in order to continue talking. And the crazy thing was, it looked to me like it was a list that had been photocopied multiple times before. So my immediate impression was like there were probably other people like me in the past who had barked up this tree. He'd done the legwork ahead of time, and he had these things ready to photocopy and send out, So it was ultimately fruitless. He ultimately went off the radar, started giving my contact information to more prisoners within the prison. I reached the point of diminishing returns, I think, where he wasn't being more forthcoming. He wasn't allowing me to come in and visit him in person. And he was just kind of stringing me along, obviously, to get these demands on his list. So ultimately, it just felt like it wasn't worth it. And he was mentally ill, by the way.
That brings up a question in my mind, because in any of these cases, you can look at the different people that went off the rails. Would they have anyway? If there was not this precipitating event, would he have still gone off the rails at some point? Maybe not as a dramatic way. Did this make him insane? Did this just feed into something he already had? I mean, it's really interesting because you and I have mental illness of a cousin, and she was very well loved and cared for. And she ended up in a home. It was unfortunate for her, not for anybody else, except her family who loved her. So you got to wonder, would he have done something if all those little things had not happened, or big things in his eyes hadn't happened to him?
Well, fascinating story. I've been wanting to tell this one for years. I think you did a great job digging up all kinds of information about this whack-a-mole. Thanks a lot. Look forward to telling the next one.
Thanks, son. Love you.